Welcome to One Man's Tracks, the second-hand music channel, and this week I found finally my Mr. Bungle album that I've been searching for. Their debut was one I heard about through a recommendation, maybe the very first recommendation I ever got through this channel, thanks to whoever that was. Big shout out. I'm sorry I don't remember your name, but I've had a bit of a whirlwind of a few years, so you'll understand if my mind's been other places, but I didn't forget about Bungle, and when I finally saw some second-hand Bungle in the wild, I did not hesitate to grab it to get the opportunity to jump into one of the 90s most fearless, ridiculous, and wonderful fusion bands to ever get major label support. Mr. Bungle began in Eureka, California in 1985 with Mike Patton, Trace Bruins, Trevor Dunn, and Jeb Watts, as well as Theo Langhill, an alto sax player, which sounds strange for a death metal project, but it would lead to their influences broadening and led them to be more open to things like jazz and ska, being true rebels in their field, bringing these ska sounds to metal shows to frustrate and confuse the metal heads and just really start to bring that weird crossover style that they have to life. It's interesting going back and listening to those early demos and hearing that eclectic style develop from the early thrash ska beginnings to their more jazzy and soundtracky and left field metallic craziness that you end up with on the later ones. One of these demo tapes is what caught the attention of Faith No More when they were looking for a singer in 1988 while recording their breakthrough album, The Real Thing, and that's when Mike Patton was called up to join them. One quick note about that first demo, the Raging Wrath of the Easter Bunny demo was actually just re-recorded as a full album with Slayer's drummer Dave Lombardo and Anthrax guitarist Scott Ian, and it is just an incredible thrash opus that was written by some high school kids. Just couldn't tell when they originally recorded it that it was this good just due to the crappy fidelity, but man oh man, so neat to see a project evolve over 35 years and them try to stay pretty true to the original stuff, and how impressive the whole composition, just the whole makeup of the thing is. Check them out. I've got them both linked down below if you want to compare them. Mike Patton would continue to work with Bungle, releasing another demo tape in 1989 titled OU818. It was their first to include alto saxist Clinton Bear McKinnon, as well as new drummer Danny Heifetz. It would solidify the band's core lineup for their upcoming studio albums, because thanks to Patton's seemingly overnight success with Faith No More, he somehow managed to strong-arm Warner Brothers into signing Mr. Bungle in 1990. The band's self-titled debut album came out in August of 1991, produced by John Zorn. It's an ambitious, wildly experimental and progressive project that manages to touch on nearly every facet of rock music, blended in a way that you might compare to avant-garde jazz with its non-traditional structures and time signatures, but it's not blended in all that fluid of a way with these thrashy, metallic bits that are sticking out all over it. That's a prolific album. I will own one of these days, but it's not the Bungle I picked up. I found their most experimental and probably least accessible album, but also their highest charting of the 90s, and so if my math is correct, it's probably the one I was most likely to find, and it's also the reason I'm never going to run out of interesting music to talk about. This is the band's second album through Warner, released in October of 1995. Mr. Bungle's Disco Volante. Self-produced by the band, this might be the most unique album I've ever encountered. Disco Volante is trial by noise, with each track subverting any expectations you might have had and challenging the listener to find and stick with the rhythm. Such diversity across and even within the track list that I struggle to succinctly surmise this enigmatic sophomore project. It's not even something you can define by what it isn't, because inevitably across this track list, somewhere on this album, you're going to find something that is kind of similar to what originally you thought it wasn't. So If that makes any sense at all, that's why I'm having a hard time with this. It's not any one thing, and that can be a really difficult hurdle to overcome when trying to introduce people to Mr. Bungle. There's no easy comparisons. You can kind of say maybe fans of Frank Zappa will like this, maybe some of the wilder metal fans might enjoy, some experimental left field fans. This has songs that feel like a whole Ween album packed into one song. There's no bonds that contain Mr. Bungle. It feels like their songs are these spontaneous neural firings that take ludicrous paths to tell these stories that seem only possible in the craziest of dreams. Disco Volante's uncompromised and unregulated sound captures an experimental band in the midst of a crisis of identity. These highly proficient musicians wanting to freeform, flex, and flow through a disorienting array of ideas and genres. This playful, darkly humorous, orchestral musical event that is so densely layered and full of grand ideas that it almost always has something new to find depending on what angle you approach it from. Visionary yet disorienting, fascinating and confounding, this is a fully loaded cinematic blast. And before I get totally lost in the mix here, please leave me a comment down below about this album or Mr. Bungle in general. Let me know, and now I'm going to be taking some time to start sifting my way through this pirate trove of tunes on this avant-garde, experimental, jazz metal mashup that kicks off with the sonic assault on the opening track. Everyone I went to high school with is dead. Preparing you for the disorienting ride ahead, you've got this dreadful, noisy, sludgy track about feeling alone in high school and the fact that once you've graduated, you really no longer have to interact with your classmates anymore. They might as well be dead, you know? Luckily for us, though, we've got Trevor, Trey, and Mike still interacting with each other to this day. They keep you on your toes, throwing a stylistic 180 at you on the contradictively titled instrumental Chemical Marriage. A loungy, ambient jazz cut that shuffles you on towards this album's most ambitious track, Carry Stress in the Jaw. This track's also known as Sleep Part 2, and like a dream, it jumps around in seemingly random patterns, then you step back from it. But when you are in this song, Mr. Bungle has found a way to make these jarring transitions almost fluid. It's a pretty spectacular track. I have no clue how they pulled this one off, and how they pull it off live is also beyond me, but it's kind of a two-parter, with the second part being a bonus track of sorts called Spy that has that sort of beachy, Bondy vibe to it. It feels like it's built around the Stand By Me riff as kind of a bass, but it's once again a little more all over the place than you can expect from just what I'm saying here. This whole cinematic 9-minute, once again really disorienting journey is one that probably took me the longest to wrap my head around, and I'm probably lying when I say I've got my head wrapped around it. The more linear Desert Search for Techno Allah is a wild and wonderful banger, and it's pretty well summed up by its title. An Arabic-influenced, grandiose techno track with a little tickling of metal in there, of course, too. Disco Volante's Italian title comes with an Italian song. Violenza Domestica is one I probably don't need to translate for you. It's really dark and starts out with what sounds like a horror film score, and then with help from a bandoneon, it's this accordion-like instrument. You're plonked down in this maybe European cafe of sorts, and you're just taken along for this tango of a man just bearing down on his wife. I really hate the sort of ASMR ascolta delivery that Patton does here, but I guess it does achieve the desired effect. After School Special has probably the most obnoxious and repeated vocal lines on this album, and it makes it my least favorite track here, but it does have some redeeming instrumental qualities, and I know the vocals are all about more domestic abuse, and it's important and it's supposed to make you feel uncomfortable, but I could just do without the vocals or the tickled baby passage and just build and crash with the fantastic organs and drums here. Mamishka Moskvas feels like I'm watching a chaotic cartoon. It's the good kind of weird, like a monkey maestro directing a playroom of animated instruments. Really fun gibberish that still managed to be surprising this deep into the album. Now we get to the over 10-minute, 10-part tale of a diver and his mishaps titled The Bends. I won't be going over each section here today, but I've got it all listed down in the description along with links to listen to this and anything else I've talked about. The gist of this track is basically a cautionary tale of underwater antics that is told with some otherworldly sonics, and it all ends up with this incredibly painful and damaging, super jarring ascent. Trying to break down this complex project is pretty tiring, so I apologize for brushing past 10 minutes of this album here. I'm trying to just save this video from not being over 20 minutes long, and so I'm just going to brush past the laid-back lounge cut about masturbation called Backstroking as well, and just move on to the final two. The first of the two is this album's only single, titled Platypus, and just the perfect title to exemplify Mr. Bungle and their mismatched stylings, this confounding creature with no standardized definition that fits real easily. This song kind of reminds me in some sections of Soul Coughing, but it also, of course, got their multi-instrumental, jazzy metal musings. The closer, Merry Go Bye Bye, is one part Cali beach rock and another disco death metal. This is a sarcastic stab at the sixth cycle of martyrdom to close out the musical portion of today's CD. There's also a bonus track that's titled Nothing, and it's credited to Danny and Theo, who didn't contribute anything in terms of writing this album. It's just a track of them kind of fucking around in the studio, smashing on the drums and playing on the trumpets in a goofy way, just using up the last of the tape that they were recording onto. This flying saucer is going to scoop you up and take you for a wild hour of wondrous and worrisome tracks that'll force you to reimagine song structure and genre boundaries. Disco Volante may be a mess, but it's a calculated one that highlights Mr. Bungle's imagination and ability to create some truly unique pieces of music. Anybody interested in experimental left-field artistry ought to give it at least a good try. Their founding sax player, Theo, left the band after touring this album due to creative differences, and they'd take a break for a couple of years, and once Faith No More disbanded, Patton got the group back together. They reconvened for their final album with Warner Brothers. Released in July of 1999, they had California come out, and they'd play their last show in September the following year for over 20 years until recently they got back together for that Raging Wrath of the Easter Bunny demo. Thankfully, most of the members went on to form other groups after Mr. Bungle, like the Secret Chiefs 3, Phantomas, Tomahawk, Dieselhead, and just so many more. It's great to have so many avenues to follow these prolific gentlemen down further. Heck, even Faith No More got back together and released Soul Invictus in 2015. There's just so many awesome new-to-me albums to explore thanks to these last couple of pickups here. What's your favorite Mr. Bungle project or song or even associated work that I ought to check out? Leave me a comment down below. Like and subscribe, like and subscribe. It tickles me every time you press those buttons. Thank you so much, and I'll see you on the next one.
You've got the bends.